I knew the moment I saw the subject line of that email, very thing had changed. Not because it came from HR, that wasn't unusual after 2 decades with the company, but because of the tiny smiley face tacked onto the end. That kind of touch, the kind meant to soften a hard message in, bodes well. And after working long enough in corporate America, I'd learned when they invite you to dinner without putting it on your internal calendar, they're not giving you an award. Friday night, rooftop restaurant, 30 stories above downtown Houston. The crystal chandelier sparkled just enough to distract you from what they didn't want to say outright. I sat across from Martin Wexlerth, CEO, who once called me the last brick holding the firewall together, his wife beside him, and their daughter across the table. She had just returned from some executive program in Europe, looking like the poster child of a leadership brochure, radiant, composed, and untouched by the weight of years. As they passed compliments and empty talk about transforming Synera DataWorks for the next generation, I sat quietly, feeling like an old family portrait being taken off the wall. No ceremony, no nod of farewell, just quiet erasure. But the part that broke me wasn't the suspicion that I was being replaced. I'd felt that coming from the moment no one knocked on my office door for advice after I started coughing through chemo sessions. What hurt was the silence how no one who once called me Martha the Fixer said a word. The same Martha who stayed late cleaning up a catastrophic data breach at 2 a.m. to save a federal contract. The same Martha who personally trained every team lead in their first year. I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at 59. Found out the morning of our Q2 budget review. I remember staring at my screen, hands trembling from my second round of chemo, trying to revise a forecasting spreadsheet. I didn't tell anyone at the company, not because I was ashamed, but because I thought if I just kept working like nothing had changed, they'd still see my value. I was wrong. After 24 years of building Synera DataWorks from a 4-person team and 2 overheating servers into a 100 million analytics powerhouse, I had become legacy code outdated, invisible, quietly deprecated. No update planned. Dinner that evening had all the polish of a corporate gala, but underneath the silverware and flattery, something cold was taking shape. Martin, the CEO I'd once believed would defend my loyalty to the end, folded his hands on the table with the practiced ease of a man who had already made a decision. He didn't begin with thanks or reflection, just a vague line about long-term planning and fresh perspectives. "Martha," he said, voice almost rehearsed, "you've been the cornerstone of Synera for nearly a quarter century. We're grateful, truly. But as we enter the next chapter, we believe it's time for a new kind of leadership." I said nothing. I didn't need to. I had spent years in boardrooms like this, watching deals rise and fall on the curve of a smile or the tightening of a brow. What hurt wasn't that it was happening, it was how little it seemed to cost them to cast me aside. He gestured to his daughter, Camille, seated across from me in a crisp white pantsuit that had never seen the inside of a server room. Camille just completed her executive residency with Vanguard Europe. She brings a fresh outlook, one we believe can carry Synera into its digital reinvention: blockchain, AI, predictive compliance. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I knew they were no longer speaking to me as a colleague. I had become a formality, a name in a press release they hadn't written yet. "What's the transition plan?" I asked. Voice even. Martin's face lit with relief. He thought I was cooperating. 6 weeks. You'll mentor her through Q3. We'll wait to go public with the announcement until after the shareholder call. Then Camille leaned forward, fork in hand, and with the sweet poison of someone who never earned what they were handed, she said, "It's time for the legends to let go. I mean, you've had quite a run, right?" The smile on her face was polished, but her eyes sparkled with condescension. I looked at her, then back at Martin, and in that moment, I realized that they hadn't just planned to replace me, they planned to erase me. The systems I'd built, the relationships I'd cultivated, the midnight fixes and early morning investor calls, they were already folding it all into a new narrative, one where I had simply timed out. But what neither of them knew, what they hadn't even thought to remember, was that Synera wasn't just a company I had helped scale. Years ago, in the messy, cash-poor infancy of our firm, when we couldn't afford to hire a CTO or even buy new chairs, Martin had handed me a 1-page agreement as a thank you for pulling the company out of near bankruptcy. "I can't pay you what you deserve," he said, "but if we survive this, I want you to own a piece of it." At the time, I thought it was symbolic, a gesture of goodwill. I signed it without fanfare and filed it away like so many other sacrifices I'd made for Sonera. But 2 decades later, when we took on outside investors and the lawyers combed through every clause in preparation for our IPO filing, that single-page contract surfaced again, and it turned out to be much more than symbolic. It was equity, real equity, 5% ownership with full voting rights. I never said a word. I never needed to. I believed I had earned my place, and that loyalty would speak louder than paperwork. But watching Camille sip wine and smile like she'd already conquered territory she hadn't even mapped, I realized that silence had a co-stand. I was done paying it. The following Monday, I returned to the office like nothing had happened. I smiled at reception, took the same black coffee from the same temperamental machine that hissed like a steam train, and sat at my desk as though the Friday dinner had been nothing more than a blur. The building still smelled like carpet glue and microwave oatmeal, and for a moment, I felt like a ghost inside a life that hadn't caught up with the truth yet. No internal memo had been sent. No announcements had been made, but whispers had begun. Luis, one of our lead data engineers, hovered at my door. "You okay?" he asked, eyes cautious. I nodded. "Just had dinner with the Wexlers." He winced. "Yeah, word's spreading. People are confused." "Let them wonder," I replied, because I wasn't ready to reveal the cards I'd been holding for 20 years. Instead, I logged into the shareholder portal. My 5% was still there, untouched. And with the Series C funding round just months ago, that sliver of equity had grown into something substantial enough to give me influence if I chose to use it. I downloaded every relevant file, stock agreements, board resolutions, executive payouts. I didn't know yet exactly how I'd use them, but I knew I wouldn't be walking away quietly. When I requested a private meeting with Martin, his assistant looked surprised, but scheduled it nonetheless. I waited until Wednesday. His office hadn't changed, same walnut desk, same glass sculpture I once helped him pick out from a street vendor during a leadership summit in Seattle. But the man sitting across from me looked different. Older, nervous, like he knew deep down I hadn't come to say thank you. "You didn't mention the equity," I said softly. His eyes flickered. "I assumed you'd sold it off years ago." "I didn't." I placed the original agreement on his desk, paper slightly yellowed from time, but the signature still clear as day. "And, unless I'm mistaken, I still have full shareholder rights." "Martha," he began, tone shifting to something between warning and pleading, "this doesn't have to become messy. We're offering you a..." Martin didn't respond right away. His lips parted as if to explain, to reason, perhaps even to apologize, but the words never came. Instead, he leaned back, eyes drifting toward the skyline behind me, as if searching for a version of the future where I disappeared quietly and let Camille step into a story she hadn't earned. "We're offering you a generous exit," he said finally, the words clipped and polished, like a quote from a legal memo rather than something meant for a human being. I nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in recognition that the man who once called me his right hand now saw me as a liability he needed to dissolve with grace. "I'm not leaving yet," I said, voice calm but unshakable. "I'll support the transition. I'll be professional. But if Camille plans to restructure or sell off systems I helped build from scratch, I will have a say." He stiffened. "You're holding on to the past, Martha." I stood, smoothing out the crease in my sleeve. "No," I replied. "I'm holding on to what I built. There's a difference." I walked out without waiting for a response. I didn't need one. That night, in the quiet of my home office, I pulled open an old cabinet whose handle had long since loosened from use. Inside were fragments of a life most of the younger team at Sonera didn't even know existed: hand-sketched architecture maps, scribbled notes from client calls, budget drafts written during midnight storms when servers crashed and Hope was running on backup power. And tucked between faded project reports and signed vendor letters, I found something I hadn't touched in years. A copy of the NDA Martin had signed in 2006, back when Sonera was still a shaky venture, trying to survive on federal grants and secondhand machines. The agreement confirmed that several of our most critical data module stools I had designed long before Sonera had even existed were licensed under terms tied directly to my former consulting work. Back then, it had seemed like a formality. Now, it felt like leverage. The realization hit me hard, not with satisfaction, but with weight. The kind of weight that doesn't inflate your ego but anchors your clarity. I hadn't just been a loyal employee. I had been a foundational architect, and I had allowed that truth to be quietly shelved behind fresh faces and buzzword-laden presentations. The next morning, I met Melissa, a former colleague who had since become a respected IP attorney, at a small cafe 2 blocks from the Sonera headquarters. She had always been sharp, but now there was steel in her presence that reassured me. I laid out everything: copies of contracts, emails, the NDA, the equity documents, and asked her, "Is this defensible?" She barely hesitated. "It's not just defensible, it's yours. At least part of it. And in the right hands, it's enough to stop them from moving forward without you." I exhaled, a deep breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. "They think I'm just a stepping stone," I said quietly, wrapping my hands around the coffee mug for warmth. She smiled. "Then show them that stones can crack foundations." For the next few days, I became invisible on purpose. I moved through the building like a shadow, answering questions, sharing files, mentoring Camille with the cool composure of someone who had already seen the end of the movie and knew which character wouldn't make it to the credits. My silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. Every hallway whisper about my composure, every puzzled glance from staff who expected a breakdown but witnessed only quiet resolve, became part of the armor I was building. Camille, sensing no resistance, grew bolder. She started poking around old systems she didn't understand, copying documentation without asking, even mapping out a retention model that looked suspiciously similar to one I had authored 6 years prior. "You're modernizing," I said when I caught her standing before a whiteboard filled with repackaged ideas. "Just make sure you cite your sources." She smirked, then turned away, perhaps thinking I was too old to fight, too tired to care, and maybe, just a month earlier, she would have been right. But betrayal has a way of waking something in you that comfort never could. The storm they thought I wouldn't survive, I had already weathered it once before. Cancer had taken my health for a time, and age had taken my speed, but neither had taken my mind, my dignity, or the years of hard-won experience that still pulsed through Sonera's core systems. I wasn't coming undone. I was coming alive. I didn't make any grand moves that week. No threats, no ultimatums, just silence, the kind that makes people nervous because it hides intention behind routine. I showed up early, stayed late, and fulfilled every mentorship duty Martin and Camille had outlined in their glossy transition plan. But beneath that calm surface, I was laying groundwork, pulling threads only I had woven, and setting in motion a chain of events no rebrand could outrun. The first step was quiet. I logged into our vendor dashboard, the one I had personally overseen for over a decade, and began compiling patterns, contacts Camille didn't understand, legacy integrations she had barely acknowledged in her optimization model, and small system flags that would trigger failures if any new interface ignored them. None of it was sabotage. It was simple fact. If you don't know how the bones of something were set, you shouldn't be the one to break and reshape them. Luis, who had been with us long enough to know when the wind was shifting, stopped by my office and slid a flash drive onto my desk. "Just in case," he said without a word more. I understood. He had seen Camille's new workflow, charts bright colors, big claims, all marketing with no muscle behind them. I plugged the drive into my personal device and found it filled with compatibility scripts, custom patches, and undocumented tools we had built through sweat and shared failures. She had no idea they existed. But Luis remembered. They all did. By Wednesday, Camille held her first independent strategy session, full of confident gestures and buzzword enthusiasm. She invited everyone except me, which didn't surprise me, but Luis forwarded the invite anyway, out of quiet respect. I read through the agenda and saw it for what it was: a roadmap to disaster. Vision 2, it said, complete with plans for back-end outsourcing, streamlined support functions, and an aggressive automation rollout. I almost laughed. Half of our clients relied on custom infrastructure that couldn't survive a generic overhaul. But Camille, who had never spent a weekend fixing a corrupted data pipeline for a defense contract, didn't know that. And Martin, tired and eager to step back, wasn't going to stop her. That night, I sent a message to Melissa. I wanted the provisional filings ready by the end of the week, not just for the legacy architecture, but for every tool, system, and module I had refined over the years. I wasn't trying to cripple Sonera. I was drawing a line. If they wanted to use what I had built, they would do so with transparency and credit. No more silent ownership. Thursday morning, I found Camille in the innovation room, pacing in front of a digital whiteboard filled with color-coded workflows. One caught my eye immediately. She had taken my 6-year-old client retention strategy line for line, metric for metric, and presented it as her own. When she noticed me, she smiled with rehearsed warmth. "I'm just building on what works," she said. "No problem," I replied, stepping closer. "Just be sure to cite your sources. Plagiarism isn't great for quarterly reporting." Her smile faltered, but she said nothing. She wasn't used to pushback, especially not from someone she considered already replaced. Later that day, Vanessa, my longtime operations lead, caught me by the break room, her voice low. "People are unsettled. Camille's pushing changes that don't add up, and Martin, well, he's silent. Is something happening?" I met her eyes. "Nothing yet. But soon." She didn't press. She didn't need to. That evening, I opened my laptop at the dining room table, sipping chamomile tea while I drafted 3 emails. The first went to the remaining board, membersa.com, reminder of my equity stake and the clause buried in our original operating agreement requiring unanimous consent for any executive restructuring that affected shareholder influence. The second was addressed to a name I hadn't typed in years, Derek Lang, the CEO of Teravox Systems, a growing analytics firm that had once courted Sonera for a merger and who still owed me a favor after I'd helped him clean up a botched integration in 2016. I asked for a quiet meeting, just coffee, just a chat. The third email was to my self-subject line, leverage. I was archiving every contract, every NDA, every time-stamped record of my contributions. I didn't want war. I wanted acknowledgement. But if they kept pushing, they would find out exactly how deliberate I could be. By Friday, the whispers had grown louder. Why hadn't Camille finalized her new model? Why was Martha still attending client calls? Why were the engineers holding private meetings without management? I walked the halls with a calm that unnerved the people who had written me off. I smiled when they expected resentment. I offered help when they anticipated withdrawal. But I said little, because silence, when powered by purpose, speaks louder than any complaint. And all the while, the company kept ticking on my systems, with my tools, through my processes. Camille may have had the title, but I still had the pulse. By the time the following Monday rolled around, 3 of Camille's flashy initiatives had already stalled. The outsourced back-end migration, postponed due to integration complications, though in truth, Luis had quietly withheld a key patch that only he and I knew how to deploy. The rebranding proposal, flagged by legal for infringing on a small competitor's trademark cone I had warned them about years ago and whose founder I happened to know personally. And the predictive analytics module she championed, it crashed the moment it was tested on live data, exactly as I'd said it would. Garbage in, garbage out. Camille doubled down, insisting it was growing pains, that innovation requires discomfort, but the tension in her voice betrayed her. Her once confident smile became something brittle, held together by ego and pressure. At her next department-wide meeting, she asked for trust. I raised a quiet hand from the back. "Disruption only works when there's a safety net," I said. "You've cut every one." She stared at me, eyes hard but uncertain. "Thank you for your input, Martha." Martin said nothing. He just sat there, gazed distant, like a man who realized too late he backed the wrong horse. That night, Vanessa messaged me. 3 clients had called with concerns. One was threatening to pull their contract if service quality dropped again. Camille hadn't returned any of their emails. "They think they can wait," I replied. "But they won't." I opened my laptop again, found Derek's reply, and typed just one line. "If your board is serious, now is the time to move." The official announcement came on a rainy Tuesday morning, as if the weather itself had caught wind of what was about to unfold. The entire staff had been summoned to the main conference hall, a space usually reserved for quarterly earnings calls or holiday parties, never internal transitions. The email used words like celebration, milestone, and future vision, but between the lines, it was clear this wasn't about recognition. It was a coronation. Camille stood center stage with a wireless mic clipped to her lapel and a slideshow behind her full of stock photos and vague slogans. Velocity, vision, vitality. Martin introduced her with a rehearsed warmth, calling her a breath of fresh energy. as if I hadn't been breathing life into this company since she was still in middle school. Then Camille began. "It's time for a new chapter at Sonera DataWorks," she said, her voice crisp and steady. "A younger, leaner, more agile organization." I sat in the second row, arms crossed loosely, watching the faces around me shift. Some glanced toward the floor, others stared blankly ahead. Vanessa looked stunned. Luis wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew what they were thinking. She's talking about Martha, and she's not even saying her name. Then came the slide titled Phase 1, Organizational Streamlining. It included staff cuts, back-end outsourcing, and, listed almost as an afterthought, legacy management transition. That's what I had become, a line item, a phrase they hoped would slide past quietly. After the meeting, Camille intercepted me in the hallway. Her tone was sugar-coated but deliberate, the kind of voice that always precedes a knife in the back. "I hope you'll handle this gracefully," she said, low enough so no one else could hear. "It's what people expect from veterans." I looked at her, not with anger, but with the weary clarity of someone who'd seen storms before and had learned which ones were worth walking into. "You mean women who've outlasted 3 CEOs and kept this company running through 2 recessions and a federal audit?" She blinked, not expecting me to say it out loud, then composed herself. "This isn't personal." "No," I said, "but what's coming might be." That afternoon, HR sent the separation package a fat check, a non-disclosure agreement, and a clause demanding full knowledge transfer. I held the envelope like it was a piece of dead weight and walked it straight into Martin's office. He looked up from his desk with the same expression I'd seen on executives who were about to be outmaneuvered, tight-lipped, uncertain, and already searching for an exit before the first shot was fired. "You let your daughter stand in front of the entire staff and act like this was her idea," I said, placing the envelope on his desk. "You let her treat me like a leftover from another era, and now you want me to train her? Hand over everything like a loyal pet before you put me down?" "It's not like that," he replied too quickly to practice. "It's exactly like that." He exhaled. "Then you leave us no choice. We'll initiate termination." I reached into my bag, slowly, deliberately, and laid the original shareholder agreement in front of him. "You're forgetting something," I said. "I still have a seat at the table. You try to force me out without board approval, and you'll be in breach of the original charter." His face drained of color. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "You think Camille's plan is bold and exciting?" I continued. "But it's reckless. Outsourcing back-end support will gut your infrastructure, and that predictive automation model she keeps pushing, it violates at least 3 client contracts and you know it." He leaned back in silence, no longer pretending to control the narrative. "I'm not trying to sink the ship," I said, quieter now, "but I won't let you sink me with it." That night, I met Luis and Vanessa at a quiet diner across town. We sat in a corner booth, rain tapping the windows, the silence between us heavy with understanding. I slid 2 manila envelopes across the table. "What is this?" Vanessa asked, wary. "Proof," I replied, "that what we build isn't just company property. It's documented, timestamped, and protected." "You're suing them?" Luis asked, half-whisper. "Not unless they force my hand," I said. "But if cuts are coming, I want you both shielded." Camille's already drafting a second round. Vanessa nodded slowly. "I've seen the drafts. She's cleaning house ahead of acquisition." "Sonera's being packaged," I said. "Streamlined, dressed up for sale." Luis looked at me, searching for something beyond anger. "Are you going to stop it?" "No," I answered. "I'm going to shape it." In the next 3 days, I moved like a ghost. I filed a cease and desist for reuse of my original modules in any new deployment. I sent a formal letter to the board stating I would oppose the restructuring unless a third-party audit confirmed technical viability. And I met with Derek Lang from Teravox just lunch, just updates. But I mentioned leadership instability, and I saw the flicker of opportunity cross his face. By Friday, the pressure reached Camille. Her tone shifted. Her meetings became shorter, and her charm gave way to irritation. She was still talking, but fewer people were listening, because while she had the mic, I had the stage. The boardroom felt colder that morning, not from the air conditioning, but from the weight of what was about to unfold. Every seat around the table was filled. Board members, department heads, Martin, Camille, and across from me, Derek Lang, the CEO of Teravox, sat with the composed expression of a man who had come not just to observe, but to decide. It was an emergency session, called by the board themselves, though no one said the word aloud. Celeste, our chairwoman, opened with a tight-lipped formality that made clear this was no longer just an internal matter. "Before we begin," she said, glancing toward me, "we need to acknowledge a number of contractual and operational items that have come to light, items that were not disclosed during the executive transition process." I didn't rise. I didn't need to. I simply opened the folder in front of me and began to speak slowly, clearly, with the calm of someone who had already lived the consequences and now carried only truth. "I gave 24 years to Sonera," I began. "I built systems, rescued contracts, mentored leaders, and kept this company afloat during seasons when most would have walked away. And for a long time, I believed that history would speak for itself. But I've learned the hard way that silence isn't the same as respect, and loyalty doesn't guarantee legacy." Camille sat stiffly 2 chairs away, flipping a pen between her fingers, her jaw clenched tight. "I don't want a title. I don't need a plaque," I continued, "but I will not stand by while what we built is gutted for optics and short-term gain. What we created here wasn't shiny or loud, but it worked, and it endured, because it was grounded in experience and protected by care." Celeste nodded, and Derek leaned forward, fingers steepled. "We've been watching closely," he said, addressing the room. "We've spoken to clients. We've reviewed the code base. We've seen the fallout. And with 3 major contracts under review and 2 suspended renewals, it's clear that Sonera's leadership transition, as it stands, is untenable." His eyes flicked to Camille, who looked down for the first time in weeks. "Our offer still stands," he continued, "but it's contingent on immediate stabilization, and frankly, that does not include the current strategic direction." Martin tried to interject, but Celeste raised a hand. Her voice was measured but firm. "Effective immediately, Camille Wexler is relieved of all transition leadership duties. Martin Wexler will remain in an advisory role through the acquisition. Martha Elridge," she turned to me, "will lead a transitional advisory team and report directly to the board and to Teravox for the remainder of this process." I didn't smile. I simply nodded. Because victory, when hard won, doesn't need applause, it only needs acknowledgement. Camille left quietly that afternoon. No farewell email, no hallway goodbyes, just a closed office door and a cleared out desk by sunset. Martin shook my hand one last time in the lobby. His eyes were tired, but sincere. "I'm sorry," he said, barely above a whisper. "I know," I replied, because by now, that was enough. 2 months later, Sonera officially became a part of Teravox. Most of the staff remained. I helped handpick the new leadership team. Vanessa became director of operations, Louise took over engineering, and for the first time in years, the org chart reflected not just talent, but trust. I didn't return to my old office. Instead, I worked from a modest home setup overlooking Lake Williston, where the mornings were quiet, the light was soft, and the dashboard still loaded smoothly, powered by systems I had designed and principles I refused to compromise. Some evenings, I'd take my tea out to the porch, breathe in the scent of pine and water, and reread the email Celeste sent after the transition was finalized. It was short. The subject line read, "Legacy." Her message said simply, "You didn't fight to be in the spotlight. You fought to be respected. And that's why you won." And I suppose, in the end, that's what mattered. Most, not revenge, not retribution, but remembrance. To be seen, to be heard, to be valued after years of giving everything without asking for much in return. If you've ever felt discarded, overlooked, or replaced after giving your all, know this: your story isn't over just because someone else tries to write the ending. Tell us in the comments, have you ever had to fight for your worth after being underestimated? We want to hear your story. So I will subscribe for more real, powerful stories of comebacks and quiet justice.